Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Running a Successful Lighthouse Project, a Story of Cloud and Agile Success. And we're delighted today to be joined by our lead associate and organisational change expert, Toby Cabalis, who is going to be sharing what happened when an investment bank engaged eSynergy and embarked on a public cloud assessment. The webinar today has been brought to you by eSynergy Solutions. We are a technology consultancy delivering business value to our clients across all areas of cloud computing. We work with a number of organisations across the public and private sector, helping them to solve challenging technology problems. Now, before we begin, please do share your questions via the chat box, and Toby will answer these at the end of the talk. We are recording the session, and the slides will be shared to you by email after the session. So now I'm going to hand over to Toby to begin the talk, and thanks again for joining.
Hello, I'm just going to welcome everybody. Hopefully you can hear me, and now I'm just going to show my screen. I'm just going to find the right one. Right, hopefully you can see a slide that says the title of the talk and not much else.
Great, yeah, all good.
Great, so we've got a few slides to get through. I'm always critical of people who have too many slides, and now I've gone and produced too many myself. So there we go. Clearly in COVID-19, I've got too much time on my hands. There's a bit of a slide about me. I'll let you look at that in your own time. You can always go to LinkedIn as well if you want to find out much more. Lots of things about work that I've done. I do host a podcast called Wicked Problems, which goes out sort of once a week, once every 2 weeks. It looks at sort of deals with those sort of problems that really have no stopping condition. One of the subject areas that we looked at a lot is around agile. And I once fell 300 meters off a mountain, which was very dramatic, but I lived to tell the tale. So there you go, something that's non-work related. Before I move on, I just want to make a couple of points. One is I'm not going to name the client. I've been through this with them, and they're happy for me to do this, but they would prefer that I didn't name them. And equally, I'm not going to give you the finer details of some of the requirements, because there's obviously a duty or an obligation of care that I have towards my clients. But that said, I'm going to start, and we'll go through this. Right. So, what was the Lighthouse Brief? Well, basically, as I've said here, it's a conservative bank. Well, that's kind of almost tautology, isn't it? Because pretty much all banks are conservative with a small c. But basically, they wanted to implement new systems to public cloud. They wanted to understand how, if they were going to move to the public cloud, what would their migration path look like for various systems, how they could introduce agile working practices to support that, and basically demonstrate the art of the possible. Now, there's a big phrase there that says "don't get eaten." That was also one of the group, well, one of the exec group members had this vision that technology, and I think I agree with this, technology has really come on a pace and is going far faster in its acceleration than it was. And I think COVID-19 is probably going to see us accelerating digital transformations. Agile is enabling the faster delivery of projects from a methodological perspective, and you know, the confluence of those two means that if you stand still, there's a risk that you'll get eaten in the future. And so part of this was to enable the bank to learn how to keep up with current trends. So the Lighthouse Drivers, well, there's that one of don't get eaten. There's also, support new business. The bank had taken on new business. They wanted to be able to support that properly. Managing DC costs, this isn't exclusive to that bank. A lot of people want to get more fidelity, I suppose, on managing the costs of data centers. Flexibility on data residency, as we see things like Swiss privacy laws, Brexit, other potential national changes. Data residency and the ability to be able to move data flexibly between jurisdictions is becoming ever more important, and that's something they wanted to explore. And then at this bank, as with many others, they were developing some new systems using microservices architectures, and so it made sense to look at cloud environments. They weren't exclusively, when they started doing that, looking at public cloud, but obviously it's an option. What were the deliverables? Well, they wanted, I don't know if everyone's heard of the 6R analysis, but that's basically the 6 R's are the ways or the methods in which you might migrate an application. So you've got things like rehost the application, retire the application because it's no longer needed, re-architect the application, because as you move from one type of environment to another, it's important that the architectural considerations are taken into account. And there's others too, and some people move that into a 7-factor analysis. There were more than 150 business apps that needed to be taken into consideration for this. They wanted to have a production-like, secure public cloud environment. Initially, when we set out, we chose AWS as our target environment. Importantly, they were interested in doing an organizational readiness assessment, right? Is the culture and the organization as it's set up ready to take on both the agile challenge and the moving things to a cloud and all the different working practices that entails? So they engaged myself. I ran an RFP. I worked with other people in the bank, and we set up a project. And we in the RFP, there were a number of firms that were considered. eSynergy was the one that was selected, and that was very much in our favor. But also in our favor, we had a courageous and visionary executive sponsor. I think that's really important. There's a John Cotter, who's an organizational change expert, reckons that if you don't have key buy-in from your exec sponsors, you're dead in the water before you started. We had budget that was committed. We had a very supportive senior management regime. We had a program manager who had come from a traditional background but was keen to embrace agile, and I think he was keen. The senior management team were keen, and you had right the way up into C-level, and that really is important. As I say, we wouldn't have got anywhere if they hadn't been. And we had procurement, compliance, and risk were all on board. They didn't necessarily know how to do it, but they were very happy to help in any way they could. And you often hear when you go and embark on these projects that those are the people who are going to be your biggest problems. Well, they weren't. They were right behind us. And we had an excellent team from eSynergy. There were challenges, right? And there always are when you do change programs. So we had Azure announce as a strategic direction within the company. Well, that's fair enough, but we were already using AWS. So as it happens, we were allowed an exception and to carry on using AWS, but it always will present a hurdle when someone changes a tack on you, because you're going to have to go and get that exception, and that's not necessarily going to get in your way, but it just is something that will take time. There's a little bit of fending off pointless tasks. These are raised sometimes by people who are resistant to the change itself. Sometimes they're just by people who don't really understand what the nature of the change is. And so they're giving you tasks that aren't relevant, but they don't know that they're not relevant. And so you have to rise above that challenge. We had a private cloud provider, and again, I won't name them, but they came in with a free offer. And so we had to spend time looking at that, and it turned out it wasn't as good as it looked at first sight. So the old maxim of if it's too good to be true, it probably is, kicked in. Something that I call known provider insurance paradigm. And now this is where people are comfortable with existing providers, right? They've always used firm X to do things. They know them, they trust them, and they know that other people in the company know that company. And with bigger consultancy firms, you also have that insurance of, well, they charge me high fees, but you know what? If they do anything wrong because of the high fees, they can afford to give me service credits or some other kind of, make things better in some other way. Of course, you have to pay for that insurance, and it's not always the great service that you think it is, but it's there as a challenge that one has to encounter. And the business unit head being frequently absent. Now that sounds like I'm being a bit narky. I'm not. It's a fact of life that if you work in an environment with that turns over hundreds of millions of dollars a year, maybe even more than that, and has business going on all around the world, the top of that tree, that person is going to be away a lot. And they're going to be on business, they're going to be doing whatever it is, but that is going to present a challenge. And it's a challenge that we as organizational change people have to acknowledge, and we have to make sure that we take steps to address it. And I guess sometimes we do that more successfully than others, but it's still something we have to be aware of. Why do these challenges come up? Well, I spoke about some of them, but some of the other reasons are time pressures, right? People want things done by date X, but nobody's actually done the work to work out if that's viable. So that puts you under a pressure. Vested interests. People, when you introduce new working processes and when you introduce change, some people might rightly or wrongly feel that that's a threat to them. In our case, the board was new to the concepts of cloud. I mean, I think everybody knows it at one level, but if you think about it in terms of your own business operating from within the cloud, that is a very new psychological paradigm for people to deal with, particularly in organizations that haven't been embracing it that much hitherto. CID protection, so client confidential information is a big concern in the banking sector generally, and quite rightly so. And so people get nervous. Personnel changes, again, it's a fact of life. You're in a big organization or a medium organization, even personnel change. People get headhunted, people leave, new people come in, and those new people will have different outlooks on life, different priorities that they have, and they may not match with what the project started out with. So that's another challenge. And then there's always the human biases. I've named a couple there. You've got escalation of commitment, which is quite a common problem in budgetary control, where people maybe have spent 10 million on a supplier, and then the thinking is, well, if we spend another 5 million, they're not developing at the moment, delivering at the moment. We spend another 5 million, that'll make them deliver. They'll get the message then. Actually, maybe not. And sunk cost fallacy, which is its close cousin. There are lots of other human biases that come into play, and if you're interested, Daniel Kahneman wrote a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which I would thoroughly recommend. So what happened though? All of that there, what happened? Well, we had resistance, but it was manageable, right? We had full support from our program manager and our business heads, and that's what made the resistance manageable, right? We were able to navigate politically something we could not have done ourselves without that support. And that helped to increase the buy-in across the corporation. Now, there was a lot of communications going on, right? Lots of comms, and that's a point I got down there later. Sorry. Without communication, you know, that won't happen. That buy-in won't go up. You need the support and you need the comms. We had a great team from eSynergy, and the great thing about that team was that it really went through the whole Tuckman model of forming, norming, performing, storming. It really went to the performing in a week. Maybe it was 10 days, but it was no longer than that. And that's very unusual, and it's great because it enabled us to bootstrap and get the project off the ground quickly. And we have positive feedback loops, and I think that's really important because it meant that the team members felt that, you know, what they were doing was actually making a difference and it was getting us somewhere, and therefore they were more motivated to keep going. In 3 months, what happened? Well, we delivered the 6R analysis that I talked about at the beginning. That's what's on the right of the slide here. A secure production grade AWS ecosystem. There were 2 demo apps migrated onto that. It wasn't something that you could have flicked the switch and gone, that's production tomorrow, but it's production grade. The reason it couldn't have been in production tomorrow was whilst we might have had 2 apps migrated, we didn't have all of the things that they spoke to migrated, and so there were some stubs and so on in there. A cultural readiness report, an organizational change recommendations, and a blueprint for operational design. So that was there so that if a next phase was to go ahead and the company was to take on board the recommendations and move into running in a properly productionized manner following a full migration, this would be a recommended way of doing that operational work. The keen-eyed amongst you will notice that there's 5 items there, not the 3 that were in the original brief, and that's, you know, that's a really, I think, a testament to the work that was done by the team, but also because you know, we were adopting an agile approach, we were able to reprioritize things as we went through this work and produce not just what we were asked to produce at the beginning, but things that occurred to people maybe slightly later on. So why was it successful? And why do I say it's a success? Well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that there was mutual respect throughout the team, right? A lot of the planning was team planning. It wasn't individuals coming along and going, we're going to do this and it's going to be by that date. It was people talking about what was the art of the possible, when could we get things done, and agreeing together, sprint on sprint. We operated a 2-week sprint cycle. What was possible. I said before, we had excellent senior support, which really helped. The team cohesion was there, and there was a lot of empathy within the team. So that ties, I suppose, into the mutual respect. But there was a lot of, I understand what you're trying to do, and I'm going to try and get things out of the way for you to be able to do that. We had adherence to well-defined principles, and I'm going to go through some of my own tips that I would recommend in a minute, so I'll come on to that again then. Behaviors reinforced through feedback, right? So people did something good, it was fed back to them that it was a good thing to do. Something didn't go so well, generally it was dealt with in the now privately, but it was dealt with. Constant backlog management. There's that awful term of grooming the backlog, but you know, it was continually groomed and continually reprioritized, and that I think really helped. Pragmatic behaviors. right? If we couldn't do something, but we could do something else that was similar, or if something might have to wait because of an external dependency, let's say, then people didn't throw their toys out the pram or get upset. They listened and they took note of that, and we accommodated and adjusted. And security baked in from the start. I think possibly we might have over-egged that, but it's really important, I believe, with a public cloud deployment that you think about the security right from the beginning, because shoehorning that in after the event is a really difficult thing to do, and can lead to problems. And I'd rather we sort of over-egged it from the beginning than undercooked it and then were unable to fix it later. Longer term, well, there is a longer term success to this, right? First of all, the company is implementing agile. It might not be exactly as we were practicing it in the program, but that's the whole point of agile, right? You inspect, learn, adapt, and so the mere fact that they've taken the learnings from that project and they are adapting them and modifying them for their purposes, I think that's a success. Recommendations from the operating model are being implemented. That's, testament to the success of the program. The strategy, in the middle of that program, or we were told the corporation was going to go to Azure, and that it would be a one-shot trick. Obviously, they were thinking about longer term that they would also be using perhaps AWS and GCP for specific services. But what we've done, or what's happened as a result, of the program, is that they have gone from looking at single cloud to multi-cloud much faster than they would have otherwise. And the outputs of what we did actually became requirements that have fed into the technology roadmap. So they are using our outputs as a tool, not the only one, but as a significant tool to drive forward the technology roadmap. And that's got to be, I think, considered a success. Takeaways. Board level buy-in, absolutely crucial, and it's hard to over communicate to those more senior people. Do it as often as you can. Change as people orientated, even technical change, right? I sometimes like to say that technical change is easy. It's the people change that's difficult. That's a bit blasé, because actually, you do need experts in the technical disciplines to be able to get that technical change effective. But they are people, the people around them are people, and it's cultural change that you're inevitably working with when you're implementing something like this. Which is why leaders are vital, but so too are those at coalface. And I would really recommend engaging the technicians early and consistently. Resistance will happen. It's just a fact of life. And sometimes it's a misconception. And I think what we have to be careful with these programs is that we identify that misconception and we don't allow it to morph into received wisdom, that we take it head on and we make sure that it's dealt with. And the whole agile concept of defining and tweaking your process, inspect, learn, adapt, and keep doing it. We went with sprints. We had work in progress limits, and we did continuous reprioritization. Those are three really key elements, I think, to making sure that you're going to deliver what it is you want to deliver at the time you deliver it. So that redefinition, I'm laboring on about it a little bit, but it's Heraclitus said in 500 BC or thereabouts. I wasn't actually there to record it, but Change is the only constant, right? Well, yeah, what that means is if you stand still, everything around you will change and you'll still be subject to change, right? And you've got the choice. You can either atrophy or you can get with the program and move forward and work out what success is going to look like. And what, you should think about the things. What is your definition of success? Well, that doesn't have to be static, right? That can change as well. What is your definition of failure? Again, it doesn't have to be static. You can redefine what those things mean. What does done mean? That changes all the time. Like that changes sprint on sprint, and it can even change sometimes within sprint. We could talk for a long time about that, but this is not the forum. So redefine and reimagine what success looks like is what I would say. It may not always even be that obvious at the time it happens that something is a success, and sometimes you need to put a little bit of distance to get an objective understanding of how successful something really is. So I'm going to give you some project tips, and I'm sure everybody's got their own project tips that they would give, and they probably don't exactly overlap with this, but these are things I've done both at, recently at an investment bank I was at, prior to that at a fintech startup, a very well capitalized one, where a project had become stuck, and I used these techniques to get the project unstuck and delivered. And also at I use these same techniques at a trading platform that I worked at a little while back. So the first one is start small, right? Do not, in my view, if you try and do the whole organization, either introducing agile across it all at once or trying to move everything to the cloud all at once, that's a recipe for disaster. Start small, grow and adapt. Set, review, adjust and respect WIP limits, right? That almost sounds contradictory, but it's that inspect, learn, adapt mantra again. Your WIP limits could change over time. In fact, they probably will, and you need to be able to, you'll start off, it won't quite be right, but as you hone them, you'll get nearer to right than you were at the beginning. Reprioritize the backlog often. So I'm a great fan of using Moscow if it's used properly. I've seen it used not properly in a few places where everything is a must-have. Well, that just means nothing is. But if it's used properly and continuously with continuous backlog reprioritization, then it's a great tool. If you're running sprints, and then I really think it's important that you never have more than 2 open. And one of those is it should be actually nearly closed. It should be there waiting to be signed off, or the only reason it's not closed is because the guy that signs it off maybe had to be in a meeting that day or whatever. And one that is a work in progress. Now that's a high bar. You won't always achieve it, but if you have it as your aim, it'll make life a lot easier. And the flip of that is if you have lots of sprints open, well, of course, what's happening is everything is bunching up and nothing's getting delivered. So it's really key. Listen to the team. Actually, the knowledge is in the team almost always. I might have some knowledge, somebody else might have some knowledge, but I definitely won't have it all. In fact, I rarely do have any. And so listen to your team, get your knowledge from your team. FaceTime and communication with execs and with teams. I think communication is really important, and it's going to become more important as we move to this, in this COVID-19 remote working scenario. Even as we unlock, we're still going to be in this remote working scenario for a long time, I suspect. The I think it was the CEO of Barclays said, the days of having 7,000 people in a building are, you know, pretty much gone. And his point was, you could have all the social distancing you want on the floor. How are you going to get people in the lifts? So, you know, and if you are remote, that means you're going to have to be relying on good, clear communication, even more than you did in the past. Use tools properly, right? If you, just because you've got Jira doesn't mean that you're doing agile. And I have personally, and I'll come on to this on the next slide a bit as well, I think we don't do enough training for leaders in most organizations around how things like agile and cloud really will affect their interactions with their teams on a day-to-day basis. And as a result, people go off and they come to their own conclusions. Occasionally those conclusions might be right, but quite often they're not. And then we get surprised when they do the wrong thing. Well, more fool us, we have to train people and we have to communicate with them. And collect data about what you're doing in your progress. Inspect, analyze, adapt. I said it again, right? A few leadership tips for the leaders amongst you, right? And I just talked about leadership training, but I can't say it too much. It's too often overlooked. And it doesn't have to be you go off for a week and sit in a classroom. It can be in the form of coaching. But you know, get yourself an agile coach if you're doing agile. Get yourself somebody technical who understands the cloud and can communicate that in a way that translates to the leaders, so you understand what's possible and what isn't. It'll do you no end of good to have that. Not all projects are the same. There is no one-size-fits-all delivery mechanism, in my view, and that's true of agile. And people sometimes say to me, well, what about we'll use SAFe, scaled agile? It has its place, but I'm generally not a big fan of saying we're going to have one form of agile and it's going to fit everybody in the same way, because that actually detracts from the small self-managed teams philosophy that is behind a lot of the agile methodologies. If you're a leader and you're asking a team to do work for you, I think it's important to be present at demos and workshops. That has been my experience in the past, has been at a number of organizations. Sometimes leaders don't turn up to those things, and what's happening then is you're really abdicating responsibility for what's going on. Delegation is fine, but I think abdication is not good. And I would just say be present, because actually you'll get to interact and you'll get to hear what's happening, and you'll be far more comfortable A, with what people are doing, and B, you'll be able to present or give ideas back, and that whole feedback loop will work much more smoothly. I think a lot of these projects, they need to be business led, right? At the end of the day, you're trying to make a change that is for the business. But that doesn't mean that you don't bring the tech leaders on the journey. You really must bring them on the journey. It's a collaboration between business and tech. Call out and deal with bad behaviors early, right? That's just good advice. If necessary, pivot, right? Change direction. It's very rare that you're going to come up with a set of requirements on day one and be able to stick to that all the way through. I don't know that I've ever encountered it in all of the many programs I've worked on. So be prepared that, you know, external events, internal events are going to happen. They're going to necessitate a change in direction. Be prepared to do that. What's the difference between leadership and management? Very, very broadly, leadership is about relationships, right? Management is about control. Now that's a very pithy statement. We could really delve into that for hours on end, but that's kind of boiling it up into one sentence. What's the leader's main job? in these types of organizational change programs? I think it's really to remove obstacles. There's many ways and many obstacles, but it's really there. You're there to remove obstacles. You're there to provide guidance and leadership and all those things as well, but removing obstacles for your team to be able to, for them to be able to do their job is, that's priceless as far as they're concerned. And change often has a longer tail than we realize. And I just go back to that statement about, well, redefining and reevaluating and reimagining success, right? There's a long tail on that. Variance is rife. That's why there's that long tail, right? You have fluctuations in collision with the different inputs in your, so they could be dependencies, for example, and harmony. That is where everything seems to be smoothly going along, but actually then sometimes there'll be some fluctuation in what's going on there. Client demand and expectations. Clients change their mind all the time, right? Or they change their priorities. Could be for very, very good reasons. And so they should be allowed to. And that's why, if you think about a statement I made earlier about reprioritizing the backlog all the time, I'm a believer that you can reprioritize the backlog right up until some work gets committed into a sprint, and even occasionally then as well. But really, right up until then, and that's the right thing to do, because client, you could have a customer leaves you, who was the driving force behind a particular requirement, or you could have new regulation suddenly brought into play. Budgets might change on you, right? That's a very common thing to happen. Stakeholder commitment. That's about, I talked earlier about how, the natural shuffle of resources within an organization creates a shuffling of priorities. And that can affect the stakeholder commitment, and it also can impact the desired outcomes that they have. The availability of expertise and talent. It's a fact of the matter that great experts that you have working for you may just get a job opportunity that they've been longing for a long time, that takes them away from you, and that changes the profile of your resource pool. So I'm just going to summarize. So the picture on the right there, I think it's really important to understand that culture is the biggest thing that you're changing, and technology is an important but smaller thing. And of course, the two overlap. Resist CAPEP, that's the known provider insurance paradigm that people fall back on. It's a kind of psychological safety net. Recruit for talent and expertise, not because you know someone. Empower teams through collaboration. There's a German philosopher, well, he's unfortunately, sorry, not with us anymore, but Martin Buber, and he wrote a book called I Thou. He wrote several books, but one of them's called I Thou, and he basically said you offer yourself in your relationship to people in one of two ways. So you either offer your relationship as a personal relationship in which you have a relationship, or you offer yourself as a transactional relationship. And so I Thou is that personal, and I think very much an important aspect of a leadership or a team dynamic. It transactional, which can be valid and useful. I go and buy a coffee in the morning. I don't have to have a relationship with that person. It might be nice if I did, but I don't have to. It's still going to work. Train or expect Peter. By that, I mean the Peter principle. So Lawrence Peter came out and said a few years back, everybody eventually gets promoted to their level of incompetence. Well, that's true, but not if you are continually teaching yourself and continually training your people, right? So that's the defense against the peace principle. Deal with negativity up front and early. We, deploy activities, active strategies to avoid bias. One of the best ones, I think, is devil's advocate, or mandated dissent, if you want to put it another way. So you have a team, you make it one person's job to actively criticize what you're proposing. Recognize risk aversion as a form of risk taking, or I should say risk making, right? Standing still and letting everything pass you by is a way of atrophying your position. It's not a way of pushing forward. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Do a communications plan. I'm a big fan of it. My communication plans always look a mess. They're continually being revised. And that's because the people in them are changing. What I can communicate, how I can communicate might be changing. But I think it's a really good thing to have. And it pays dividends even if you don't follow it to the letter, because it's somehow germinating inside your mind in the background and helping you to achieve the right balance, I think, of communication. Reevaluate and reprioritize constantly. Wicked problems, I talked about the podcast earlier. Wicked problems actually came from Problems in Design Thinking, which is a paper 1973 by Horst Rittel and Melvin Weber, and was taken on as a subject by Professor Keith Grint at Warwick University. And he said, basically, all planning problems are wicked problems. You've got tame problems, which are problems that you know how to solve. They're very easy. I've run out of milk. I go to the corner shop, buy milk. I've got milk. You've got critical problems. Okay, those are problems where they're more command and control problems, right? We're going to, if we don't pull the nose up on the plane, we'll crash into the ground. I haven't got time to explain to you why, but just pull the nose up on the plane, please, right now, and we'll avoid that problem. Okay, not that anyone's flying anywhere at the moment, however. Wicked problems, they tend to be problems that defy proper definition. They have many inputs, often of which you can't define all, and they often don't have a stopping condition. And another facet of them is that if you think you've solved something over in one part of it, and you think you maybe solved the whole thing, what you find is you've actually broken something in another part. And Keith Grint said, what wicked problems need are clumsy solutions. Aim for good enough, not perfection. And excuse me, that doesn't mean you can't solve the problem. It just means that you're always refining your solution. And he also identified, by the way, organizational change as a wicked problem. And I think I would agree with that. Thank you. If you want to, if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat window now. If you don't want to ask them now, or if you're not on the in the live presentation webinar, feel free to reach out to me at one of these ways. So you can catch me on email, or you can go to the podcast thing, or you can look me up on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, and I will hand back to Adele and see if there's any questions.
Great, thanks so much, Toby, for that. We're just gonna, as you say, go to the questions. So if you could please fire your questions over through the questions box, we'll go to those now. So let's just have a look. I know a few have come through. Bear with me one moment. Great, so Toby, first question we have, is now really the time to be introducing new business practices?
I think, so by that question, I suspect what's meant is, if I haven't got agile in my organization, should I be introducing something like that, or should we just be sticking with what we know for now, because the world's a scary enough place as it is, what with pandemic, lockdowns and all the rest of it. And if I take it on that basis, I would say it absolutely is the time to be introducing new practices. The fact is, you aren't going to be all in the same building anytime soon. So now is the time to start thinking about how can we devolve responsibility and communications and get people working in a way that is different. I think also people are primed to work in a different way at the moment. There's the psychological acceptance that things can change. We've seen firms who a few weeks ago really thought that when the lockdown started, for example, a lot of companies thought, oh my goodness, how are we going to survive? Our systems will never cope. And then in fact the systems did cope. So yeah, I very much think I think there's going to be a lot of digital transformation coming up as a result of COVID-19. Maybe people have managed to keep some systems together, so they're going to need, but they know it's a sticky tape and plaster job, and they know they need to get on with some of and accelerate some of the digital change. So yes, I think this is a great time.
Great, thanks, Toby. Next question. Is public cloud more or less secure than deployments to one's own estate?
That's a good question. So well, my view is that public cloud is actually more secure, right? And I come at this from a number of angles. So first of all, cloud is nothing new, right? And the security model's been going around for quite a long time, and it's got to be to the point where it's quite a mature model. And if you look at things like zero trust as a security model, I think that's incredibly powerful. You don't have to be in the cloud to deploy that, but that's certainly something that you can use in the cloud to make your systems very, very secure. And of course, you have the benefit if you're using something like Terraform or Ansible, where you can deploy changes on a mass basis very, very, very quickly. So what you don't have is you don't have to rely on engineers running around patching things in a data center, which takes time. You can actually get those changes rolled out in minutes. And that's, I think, a really secure way of doing things. And then there's another way of looking at this, which is, from actually, if I'm getting hacked, what are hackers doing? Well, they're looking for weak points. And as technology evolves and we move more and more systems into the cloud, that is where the security effort is going. It's a bit like people who were running XP computers and kept on them for a while because they knew what they were doing with them. Unfortunately, those things stopped becoming as supported over time. And so I think what you'll find is actually if you stay in traditional data centers without a very good reason and without a very good team, you could find yourself at much bigger risk than if you're going into the cloud. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Toby. Next question is, where do you see overlap or complementaries, if any, between cloud technology and agile methodologies?
I think there's a lot of overlap. I mean, so the cloud's been around for, in one form or another, for over 20 years, and so is agile. And by the way, people often say Agile Manifesto 2001. I can point you at books about Kanban and small self-managing teams that date back to 1970s. So it's actually been around a lot longer than we think, or many people think. And the cloud's been around since we had the ASP systems in the late 90s. It just wasn't called that then. And some people argue that mainframes are a form of cloud. I'll leave that one to others to debate. But What I think there's a complementarity, if that's the right way to say that, is that both enable deployment of systems quickly and allow us to change and pivot and change direction quickly, and that's immensely powerful when you couple the two together, right? And I think if they just are a natural bed for those, actually. There's an awful lot of overlap. I think agile has perhaps been waiting for cloud and cloud for agile, and people are now understanding how to mix the two together. So I think there's a lot of overlap.
Great. And I think last question is, do you believe demonstration is key to influencing those in the FUD camp?
Yes, short answer. I think it's the whole thing of lead by example. I mean, demonstrating the art of the possible. How far you have to go in that demonstration, I think, depends really on who you're dealing with, and that's kind of an assessment that you have to make in that, in relation to the project that you're working on and the people that you're interacting with. But yeah, I think demonstration is a really good way to get people on board. And if you can do live, that was one of the things I really like to do. So fear, uncertainty, doubt, right? Well, what's the thing you're afraid of? Well, probably if you're in banking, you're afraid that your client data is at risk, right? Well, client data, I could say is just data at some level. So what I can do in a demo is I can designate some data that isn't really secret, but I can say, right, for the purposes of this demo, this is client data, right? Well, let's see how we can protect it, and we can go through ways of protecting that and showing how it's possible to protect that. I also think, by the way, that workshops or experiential workshops are a really good way of helping people overcome fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I did a great exercise at a bank not long ago where we went through with a security company, a cybersecurity company, ways in which a specific system chosen by random by the bank, how could this system be? Is it surely we've done all the work we need to do to make it secure, and it couldn't be any more secure in the cloud. And by going through some examples and showing, and I think it was great because we were able to dig into the actual specific technology and say, here's where you might find errors in what where you are now. Here's how it could be addressed in the cloud, and that's an eye opener for the people in the room. 4 hours, right? Half a day, a number of people in the room. Really opened their eyes and made them aware of the possibilities, and they were afterwards really grateful because they had a new way of thinking about how to address a security problem. And I thought also what it really did is it also showed them how moving into a new technology can really help make their world more secure. So yeah, I'm a big fan of it.
Great. Well, I think that's a wrap for the questions today. Thank you so much, Toby, for being our guest speaker and joining us and sharing that story today. If anyone does have any further questions for eSynergy or with Toby, please do fire them over to me. My email's there, and we'd love to hear from you, any feedback that you have. And I guess no matter where you are within your transformation journey, eSynergy can support you in delivering that business value from the cloud. So please do reach out if you'd like any further advice or would like to talk through in a bit more detail what you've heard today. We'd love to speak with you. So please do get in touch. And thank you all for joining. And thanks again, Toby, for delivering the talk. That was great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.